The gentlewoman from New York, Ms. Ocasio Cortez, is recognized for 5 minutes.
I thank the chair and Chairwoman Maloney for convening the hearing. And I thank Congresswoman Presley as well as Bush for highlighting two very important topics, but especially debunking the myth of CCS as some sort of proven or effective method of drawdown. Exxon, Chevron, and BP and Shell all say that they support the Paris Agreement. And all four companies have made public pledges in which they claim are consistent with the Paris Agreement's goal of keeping warming below 1.5 degrees Celsius. But virtually every credible scientific study that we have found, or rather has concluded, that all four companies' pledges fall terribly short of this goal. MSCI, a prominent investment research firm, has estimated how much the planet would warm if the future economy reflected the climate pledges of each of these fossil fuel companies. So if we start with Shell and BP, these pledges may be more ambitious than other US companies, but MSCI says that if the world economy reflected Shell's pledge, the world would warm to 2.7 degrees, far higher than the 1.5 of Paris. If it reflected BP's, we'd have 3.1 degrees Celsius. Now, Dr. Mann, I think sometimes what gets lost in the public imagination is that the actual number, 1.5, 2.7, 3 degrees Celsius, may seem quite small to a layperson, maybe perhaps not a big deal. And so I kind of want to go a little bit back on the record, because in many of our hearings, we haven't really had witnesses be able to actually articulate what this means for humanity. So let's get a better sense of what that would look like and for the world. In images, in experiences, what would global warming of about 3 degrees look like for the planet and for everyday people? What are their experiences? What are we seeing, et cetera?
Yeah, well, I mean, if you look at the worst events that we're now dealing with, the superstorms, the wildfires, some of this stuff feels almost dystopian. It feels like it's a view into a future apocalypse, but it's now. So imagine it getting that much worse. Imagine that we have twice as much area burned each summer in the Western United States. Imagine that the floods grow, a foot or more greater than what we've seen so far. Imagine sea level rise combined with more intense hurricanes that makes a superstorm Sandy event like you folks experienced in New York, rather than being a 1 in 100 or 1 in 30 year event. That sort of event happens typically every other year. That's a possible future. We've even done some research that bear out those numbers. So, you don't have to use your imagination. That's what's so unfortunate. You can see these impacts now playing out, and they will just get that much worse if we don't act.
Now, Ms. Lewis, are any of these companies, fossil fuel companies, in your view, currently making the investments necessary to reach a 1.5 degrees Celsius goal?
No, they are not.
And do any of these companies' financial plans for future investments put them on a path consistent with the Paris Climate Agreement either?
Sadly, they do not.
So, they're publicly saying that they believe in the Paris Agreement, but all of their actions pretty much indicate that is a lie. Would you think it'd be fair to say that, Ms. Lewis?
Well, Congresswoman, I would call it a falsehood.
Okay.
But yes, your term is very correct.
Thank you. I appreciate your diplomacy. And perhaps, I think that may be because the press is too good to let go. Not only is it the fossil fuel business model, but also they receive millions of dollars in government subsidies, including the 45Q tax credit, which provides companies with a rate of $50 per metric ton of carbon capture that Congresswoman Presley had mentioned just immediately previously. So, Ms. Lewis, what kinds of perverse incentives do tax credits like 45Q set up for big oil companies? And, I know Mr. Van Baal seemed to have his hand raised, and I'd like to give him an opportunity to speak as well.
Sure. I'll just say that Congress could pass EPWA, the End Polluter Welfare Act, to address some of those concerns, and I'll defer to Mark.
Yeah, the remark I like to make about all these pledges of these oil majors, they all pledge to be Paris aligned in 2050. And they don't take the necessary action in the next 10 years. In the next 10 years, we will win or lose the fight against climate change. We have to make very bold and brave decisions in the coming years to reduce emissions by 50% in 2030. So talking about 2050 is pointless if you don't have targets to reduce your emissions in the next decades, and none of these 4 oil majors has. Although the shareholders want them to do that because their shareholders see that all their assets are at risk.
Thank you very much. Now yield back to the chair.